Welcome to the Stogie Geek Show, episode 113. This episode is sponsored by Mr. J's Havana Smoke Shop, located in Rhode Island. They have an outstanding selection of premium handmade cigars. And by the Havana Cigar Club in Warwick, Rhode Island. It's a great place to enjoy a drink and a cigar. Stogie Geeks listeners can find a $5 off coupon on our website by clicking the HCC logo. And by Debonair Cigars. Visit stogiegeeks.com/debonair for a list of retailers who carry Debonair cigars. Buy some today and get a little more debonair. And by Ocean State Cigars. Try the J. Grotto Series cigar, including the Connecticut Shade Silk and the new J. Grotto Anniversary. Visit them on the web at oceanstatecigars.com for a full list of retailers near you. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Stogie Geek Show. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. And those of you looking at the live camera or watching the video will notice this fine, handsome, bearded gentleman sitting to my right. This is Mr. Jack Daniel. He decided to stick around from our previous show, and Jack is going to be our mixologist for the evening, and we're going to be talking some cocktails very shortly here. So, Jack, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Jack doesn't actually smoke cigars, but, you know, his beard's still yellow, which I don't get.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know what? I'm not going to ask. On the lines via Skype, Mr. Will Cooper. Welcome, Will.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Hey, Paul. Hey, Jack. Thanks for joining us tonight.
I wish I could be pouring for you tonight, but we'll have to do it virtually.
Yes.
Yep. Absolutely.
A virtual
it's the thought that counts.
So tonight we're smoking whatever the heck we want to smoke. I love these shows because I get to smoke whatever the hell I want to smoke. So, Will, what did you end up lighting up in the whatever the hell you want to smoke show segment?
I tell you what, I pulled out a Liga Privada UF13 Dark that's about a year and a half old. This is the aroma that came up this thing from the wrapper before I lit it. It was this wonderful barnyard aroma that I couldn't believe how good it smelled. It's a 5.5 by 52, kind of a Robusto size cigar. It's got a Connecticut broadleaf wrapper, Brazilian Modafita binder, and a mix of Honduran and Nicaraguan filler.
Excellent. I picked up a La Riqueza from Robusto size from 2006.
Ooh.
I'm told these were purchased in October of 2013. This was in a fabulous pack I got with a good friend, Zedman. I don't know if he's in the chat. I haven't logged in yet. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about this cigar right now, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. It could go either way. Hold on. Let me take another puff, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. There's kind of this, I want to call it like tree bark kind of flavor I'm getting from it. And I'm not sure if I like it so far.
Well, I wonder if there's a point where, we've talked about aging a cigar, right?
Yeah.
But is there a point where it reaches the apex, the summit, and then it's just, after that, it's downhill?
I think there is, because there's no spice. There's just this very interesting flavor that seems to come out now. The spice isn't there. And it tastes a lot of, like, wood notes, but more like bark than wood, which is
you and I have smoked a lot of Lara cases, and that's why I'm thinking it may be on the overage side.
There's usually this kind of crisp, clean flavor, for lack of a better term, associated with the La Riqueza. Like, and these are are these Nicaraguan puros?
They're Nicaraguan puros. The interesting thing is, and I'm going to talk about this later, Mark Jr. came up with an expression when he was reviewing a Cuban called Cuban crispness.
Yeah.
And that cigar has that Cuban crispness to it.
Not the ones from '06 now. It lost that crispness.
Yeah.
And it almost is somewhat flat. I'm disappointed. Zedman's probably, if he's in the chat, probably going crazy, and I'm probably off my rocker. But
Well, at least you're not having Paul syndrome. I mean, so that's a good sign.
well, the draw is a little tight, but that's to be expected. So I smoked a UF13 this week, Will.
Yeah, you were saying when we were talking Tuesday night. I didn't realize you were.
I was smoking a UF13, and I love that stick. That stick's got a great progression from start to finish. It really does some cool change-up things and keeps your attention for sure. So
It was a top 10 cigar for me last year. Probably, as the Unicos go, it's right up there with the Dirty Rat. Maybe it's even a little ahead of the Dirty Rat right now. This has really become one of my favorites in the Liga Privada line.
Yeah, I agree. I like that better than the Dirty Rat.
It's very smooth. It's got this smooth, but it's got some boldness to it.
Yeah, what's interesting is the Dirty Rats will go through this progression where sometimes they're just really, really awesome. So like when they're in their prime, they're pretty hard to beat. But I think overall, in general, those UF13s they're the bomb.
They are. They've been the most consistent. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of releases of them. I think there's only been like 3 batches released, but they've been consistent. I've not had any issues with these cigars. Some of the, go back, there's been a couple of batches of the Liga 9s and the Liga T52s that have been off, and I'm not afraid to say that. They've rebounded them, but these have been consistent so far.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about another Liga Privada later in the show. And stay tuned for that because you're not going to miss it. And there's a story that goes with it, too, which is awesome.
That's even better.
All right. Let's Mr. Jack Daniel is here. We're going to talk cocktails, Will, for a little while.
All right.
Jack is like a part-time bartender or something. What do you call that?
Like a lot of things in life, it's fun to do as a hobby, but doing it for a living is, being a real bartender is hard work and long hours. And
that's good.
It is fun to play. And one of the things about cocktails, a lot of folks will ask why you would mess with a good bourbon or why you would mess with a good rye or a scotch. And a lot of single malts aren't really ideal for mixed drinks. They tend to have a character that doesn't stand up, but a good bourbon or rye is a good base to get creative with. And one of the things about cocktails and food pairings or any kind of pairing for
cigar
flavor
pairings
is that if you're trying to pair to a wine, you've got to find the wine that works. If you're trying to pair to a beer, you have to find the beer that works. If you're trying to find a bourbon or a dark rum, you've got to find the one. In the case of doing a little bit of creativity with cocktails, you can build what works. So you can take flavors that work for you. You can tune it to your own preference. It's more art than science. So that my advice is always follow the recipe the first time and then just get creative. And a lot of drinks are variations on older drinks. And the building blocks really are a strong liquor, some sort of sweetening agent, some sort of bittering agent, and some liquid, right? Yeah. And so the fruit often adds limes, add some bitterness, but they also have citrus sweetness. They also add liquid to it. The use of bitters, I'm a huge fan of the use of bitters, and you can really get creative with what you do with bitters, and you can do things like find a smoother bourbon, for example, and normally for a Manhattan you want a rye or something that can stand up to the vermouth, but you can use a sharper bitters. Or if you've got a dark rum with a lot of character, like the Black Barrel we did Manhattans with a few weeks ago, you can change up. So, for example, you're having an old-fashioned which is using.
We've covered old fashions on the show.
Right, and so this is just a variation of an old fashioned. So it's
awesome, by the way.
Evan Williams 1783, which is a phenomenal bargain bourbon. I've used a modified simple syrup. Normally you would do a sugar and muddle with things, but for travel I do that. For a lot of people that don't like the burned or cooked flavor that comes in simple syrups, one trick is to just bring the water to a boil, take it off the heat, dump the sugar in, stir it. You don't actually cook the sugars. You don't really
so
add.
You're just melting the sugars. Yeah.
So you're adding sweetness only.
Yep. Interesting.
And so you're not.
So you made that simple syrup yourself.
Yeah. All you're doing is it's sugar and water.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so
that's cool.
And if you're working at a regular bar, or working at home where you have things, go ahead and use the sugar. Add a little water, a splash of bitters, and then muddle it, the traditional old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
But if you're packing up some stuff to, drive across town, it makes it really easy to go. The other thing you can do is experiment with different sugars. So earlier this evening we were doing more rustic drinks with a more coarse sugar. This is refined sugar. And instead of a traditional...
So this old-fashioned, Jack, you used your special simple syrup.
And
then the Evan Williams. And then what types of bitters did you put in here? 'Cause it's very different.
Instead of using a traditional like Angostura, first of all, I'll never speak ill of the classic Angostura bitters. They've been around for well over a century because they're extremely flavorful and versatile. But there are other directions you can go. This happens to, the primary flavor is Fee Brothers Black Walnut Bitters. It's got a little sharpness, a little extra tannin in it. And so you get that. There's not a lot of sugar syrup in there, but there's also some Fee Brothers West Indian Orange, a sweeter orange bitters. And there are a lot of different orange bitters. You have to see which ones you like.
There are a ton of different ones.
Angostura.
What I find is interesting, Jack, is first of all, that black walnut bitters complements a cigar extremely well. That flavor, you make a cocktail with that particular bitters in it. Let me tell you, cigar people out there, you're going to want to have a cigar, and it's going to pair with a lot of different cigars. The other thing I think is interesting is there's this parallel between cocktails and cigars, right? It's that balance that you have. So when they blend the tobacco, they put different types of tobacco in to give you that balance between spice and pepper, sweetness, and all of the different flavor profiles. A cocktail is the same way, and it's an amazing experience is when you get a good balanced cocktail with a nicely balanced cigar. They pair so well together. But not all cocktails go well with cigars.
Oh, no, they certainly don't. So yours, the last thing, a lot of more modern, and by modern I mean 60, 70 years, old fashions muddle orange and a maraschino or sweetened cherry. Instead of muddling fruit in, I put a splash of Luxardo, which is a really high-end, it's not outrageously expensive, but a good maraschino liqueur, proper maraschino. And that's got that set of flavors. Now, I went with a classic cocktail, the Negroni, which when I handed it to you, I started thinking, that's not going to work with tobacco. And Negroni is Campari, which is an Italian, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's got a strong flavor. It's red. I've used a sweet vermouth, a Carpano Antica, which is a sweet red vermouth, and then a very flavorful gin, Bombay Sapphire, which is probably a little too botanical for this, and then a splash of those orange bitters. And this is a very classic cocktail, but it's one that isn't going to work. I can't imagine a cigar or pipe or anything that it would work with. It's a great drink, but it's not one. Now there are other things that it would go with. It's got a clean, sharp taste. But what you do is you kind of go there. The other bitters that I will mention is there are a couple different companies that make them. Fee Brothers out of Rochester, New York. You can buy an assortment from them. Fee Brothers makes a what they call their Aztec chocolate bitters, and that is chocolate with a little cinnamon. And you wouldn't do that alone in an old-fashioned, but if you were using something like the Black Barrel rum, I forget who makes that.
Yeah, describe that cocktail because that cocktail was fabulous and went really well with a cigar. And The chocolate
blanking.
bitters really brought out the flavors of my cigar.
Man, senior moment. I was going to pick up a bottle and bring it over. So,
So that was
one of the
it was
rums-
Mount Gay rum.
it was a Mount Gay. Mount Gay has a black barrel. Mount Gay black barrel is, and Mount Gay rums are kind of whiskey-like in the rum spectrum. They're not really, like a Captain Morgan or a Kraken or something spicy. They're not a light rum.
We drink a lot of different rums,
right?
with
And so
cigars, too.
it's more towards the Ronzacapa end. It's finished,
Yes,
right?
it was.
It's in that. So now what they do is they do aging in new charred white American oak barrels, which is the same barrel aging that qualifies for bourbon. They do that. So the finish on this is a very whiskey-like rum, and therefore you can use it in Manhattans or old fashions. And what we did with that,
in old fashioned,
we did a Manhattan.
we
And
did
so
a
I
Manhattan
used
with Mount Gay rum.
so the Mount Gay black barrel.
Yep.
Instead of using a red vermouth, because that's got that's got a lot of sharpness to it, and that's an acquired taste. I used a Blanco sweet martini, but one of the white sweet vermouths.
Yes, that made a big difference.
With that, and then I used some of the Aztec chocolate bitters, and then a little bit of orange bitters.
Yes.
And I also did a splash of traditional Angostura bitters.
Yeah.
Because the chocolate by itself needs balance.
Some balance, yeah.
And so that was 3 bitters, a vermouth, and then the alcohol.
And it's interesting, when you said you put 3 different types of bitters, I was thinking like cigar terms, like overly spicy. But it wasn't overly spicy. It was a perfectly balanced drink.
There's the balance, and you don't have to put a lot in. And some things are very overpowering. When you experiment with drinks, you start getting some of the exotic stuff, and it will take over your drink quickly. One, Herb Saint is fantastic. Very strong absinthe or licorice flavor, right? Aniseed flavor. It is really overpowering. So you'll see things that'll say, a splash in the glass, rinse the glass, and dump out the excess.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's being pretentious, right?
Yeah,
For dry vermouth, you'll hardly even taste it. Something like Herb Saint, if there's more than a couple of drops in a drink, it will overpower it, even if it's a strong liquor.
It's interesting. There's some tobacco leaves that I'm sure do the same thing.
It lets you bring things in. So if you like things that are a little sharper in flavor, and your buddies or your spouse likes things that are a little milder, you can pour 2 drinks that are the same drink, except one of them gets tuned. One of them gets a bitters that you like, a sharper bitters like the more of the black walnut. Another one gets a little less of the Angostura. One gets Angostura orange, which is sharper, much stronger.
Yes,
one gets Fee Brothers, and it's a balancing act. And it's
So now, Jack, if you were listening at home and now you're thinking, well, I got all these great cigars to smoke. Now I want to mess around with these cocktails, and I want to do something interesting. We've talked a lot about different kinds of whiskey, rum, scotch on the show. If you maybe had to have a book for someone that you would recommend to start experimenting with these cocktails, because you want to make one at home, like you want to make the drink that I have here and have it with a cigar, which I highly recommend. That black walnut bitters is just fantastic. With what was the other thing you put in this?
This is black walnut bitters, orange bitters, and Luxardo
cherry liqueur.
And not much, because it's very it's a sugar syrup, so you don't want to overdo it.
But if I wanted like a book, I mean, we happen to have one here.
So these books are starting points. I want to stress that. These books are starting points. And I won't say anything negative about the cheap books that come with, that are at the liquor store and have the same brand as all of the odd flavors of liqueurs. But if you move out of there into one of the books that really goes into maybe a little bit of history, maybe one of David Wondrich's books, but remember, that's a launch pad, because you can't go wrong. These are great for getting you started, but you won't find the recipe for what you're drinking in a book. It starts out with, we're going to go here and we're going to have some fun with it. There's a place in New York called Please Don't Tell, or PDT. It's a speakeasy. It's behind a hot dog stand. You've probably seen it like on Esquire magazine, on TV, and other places. The PDT cocktail book, this is cutting edge stuff. It's hardcore. a lot of the specific types of alcohol can be overwhelming, but you use it as a launch pad, and you kind of think of what they say about them. They have some ideas for bar setup and what you should stock, and I think it's a really good one. It's probably not the first one to get, but it's a really good one. If you're really into this flavor balancing idea,
which I think a lot of cigar smokers will be, because I think we're going to tune a cocktail to the kind of cigar we're going to smoke.
So bitters are very powerful, and there is a book on bitters, creatively titled Bitters. Brad Thomas Parsons wrote this book, and it's actually a couple of books in one. There's a history of bitters in it, and then there's some recipes for making your own bitters, which is relatively simple. Don't be put off with this. This is a bit of interesting herbs and spices and alcohol and syrups, and you let it age for a while and strain it out, and you've got a bitters. Start out following the recipes. You might want to get creative with them. There's some that you need to be aware of. It's possible if you get really creative with the stuff in your wife's herb garden, make sure, or your husband's, not to be sexist, if you get creative with stuff in the herb garden, make sure that you know, or you ask somebody what you're putting in there, what the significance of that is. That's just my little disclaimer. But so this starts with the history, goes into a bunch of recipes, and then it goes into drink recipes. And Brad will often say, I only want my Manhattans with rye, but I'm never going to turn down a bourbon. He's more flexible because he's not creating the master book.
Yes.
Now the master book is fantastic for going on. There are a bunch of other ones. These just happen to be some of my favorites. One of the things that both of these tend to steer you towards is building a huge bar setup. And one of the things that I've realized, just sort of gradually, I always knew it, but it really came home this year in Las Vegas, and since then, that it can be overwhelming, and you can think, all right, I've got to go out and buy an extra dry gin, and I've got to buy a botanical gin, and then I've got to find an Old Tom gin. Good luck finding an Old Tom gin somewhere, but you really want, if you want to try things, you really want to try a malty gin, and then you need, sharp ryes and smooth ryes and sharp bourbons, and you're looking at spending several $100s on booze at the liquor store, and then you look at the glassware and mixingware, and forget all that. What I would recommend, until you're sure you want to play with this, is think about what you really need. And so there's some basic tools: a shaker, a strainer, and a muddler.
Yep. I need a muddler. I don't have one.
And you can get these. I mean, you can get those $20. There's got to be a local kitchen supply or chef supply place near you where you can get a $4 or $5 wooden muddler, a $3 strainer, and a Boston shaker. And so there are a couple different styles of shakers, shake drinks. The ones with the strainer built in, and then there's the two-piece, the classic glass. And
yes.
You will get stuff all over your hands. Neither one's going to keep you dry. No style will keep you dry. Just really, resign yourself to that.
Yeah.
It'll get messy. It's part of the fun. And then get some bitters that sound interesting. I mean, if you really want to go all in, there's some assortments you can buy. You can buy the 12-pack on Amazon from Fee Brothers, and it has a pretty assortment.
Nice.
Or you can grab a few. But, if you grab one or two orange bitters, Angostura, and another interesting bitters,
you're
maybe get the walnut chocolate. So you grab like half a dozen different bitters, a couple of different sweeteners. So you get like a sucanat or a raw sugar turbinado plus refined sugar, which you probably already have around the house. Now, maybe $100 that you've spent, and now what you do is with that, you look at what you already have. And it's like, hey, I got this bottle of I've got this bottle of vodka. Well, if it's flavored vodka, you're lost, right? But, give up. So we can't talk about vodka. Vodka really just I go off because the proper way to drink vodka is doing vodka shots properly chilled. Otherwise that's flavorless, right?
Well, you could do it at the martini with a twist.
Yeah, you can
shake it, make it really cold, put a twist.
You can do those, but you get into
I find those will go very well with cigars.
Right, you get into the brown liquors. So if you're really looking to pair to something, either big foods or tobaccos or things, you're going to come to the more full-bodied rums, bourbons, the whiskey families, and that's where you can experiment. And really, the building blocks really are alcohol, sugar, water, and alcohol, sweetener, water, and a bittering agent. And so grapefruit juice is a bittering agent and a liquid and has some sugar in it. You know, so that's where you juggle. And there are a couple of things.
So now, do you taste the bitters before you put it in the drink?
So if I don't know what the balance is, I will just put a couple of drops in the back of your hand and
it's
give it a slurp.
It's similar to blending cigars, right? Now, Will, you've been out to Nicaragua and such, and we've talked to blenders, right? They're tasting the individual leaves to see what their individual components are. Is that right, Will?
Right.
Yeah.
They're doing burritos where they're actually rolling up one leaf at a time, and they're tasting it. They're doing the aroma as well.
Yep. And I've seen Jack do the exact same thing when making cocktails. Each individual ingredient you're sampling on its own to figure out what to make.
Right. And once you're a little more familiar, you give them a sniff and make sure that, this batch of something is what you expect it to be. It tends to be consistent. When you see people making cocktails, one of the things that you'll see good professional bartenders do, especially if they're getting creative, is they will dip a straw in and, take that fraction of an ounce.
Yes.
Dip a straw and make sure that what they're handing you is where they want it to be.
Yes.
And especially if they're getting creative. And so if you say, I'm really I've been on a Manhattan kick, but I want something a little sharper, they're going to go and think about whether they're going to use a sharper whiskey or
sharper bitters.
They're looking at this huge array. At your house, you're like, well, hey, one of the advantages of having grown kids is the adult kids buy you booze because it's easy, right? Dad's off the Christmas list because I'm going to buy him whiskey, and so you look at what you've got and you have a little sniff and see what it is, and sometimes it's going to be, that Caribbean cask Balvenie, and I'm not mixing anything with it.
Yeah.
Right. I might put a little tiny splash of water or. Purists forgive me. I might put a small sliver of ice in there to give it some water and a little cool it off. Other things, it's like, oh, this would be good. I love Bullet. I love to drink Bullet, but it's a good mixing.
Well, and this is a great point. That a lot of times we've just drank one particular spirit, either on ice or with a splash. And sometimes you got to mix it up a little bit, or you want something more dynamic. I think a cocktail is the way to go. And I find that if you get a really high-end scotch, like you were saying, you can pick out those different flavors, and it's almost balanced in and of itself.
Right.
But if you want to save some money, that bottle of what is this in here, Evan Williams?
So there are a couple of them. Yeah, Evan Williams by itself is a bargain bourbon. The Evan Williams 1783, I believe, is a fairly newer release from them. First time I tried it, I could not believe that it was at DerbyCon, and someone handed me some, and Bill from No Starch. And he's like, "Here, try this," and he said, "That's a $15 bottle." And
$15 a bottle.
$15 for $7.50. So the 175 that I've got over there was $28.
Wow.
And that's the base
and
for that.
And
I will drink that straight.
Yep.
But at that, I have no qualms experimenting. Right.
Right.
And so there are a couple of other things. If it doesn't work, it's still booze. That was something I learned from a bartender friend. He made it very clear. If the flavors don't work, it's still booze. Right. And so that's where
it still does its job. Right.
And that's where either dump it or. If you don't want to dump it, if you want to be frugal, throw some simple syrup on it and some tonic water, or top it off with ginger ale, or if it really needs to be sharpened up, dump some ginger beer on it and knock it back and make the next one better.
Right.
And if you have 2 or 3 mistakes and water them down
they
and knock
become less
them down,
noticeable.
then you don't notice the mistakes. Now we're getting out of the subtleties of flavor at that point, but they can't all be winners. But you can really say, I think this is very smooth, and so I'm not going to. I want something smooth, and so you'll go for a bourbon instead of a rye, and you'll go for a little less of traditional Angostura instead of going for the black walnut and sharpening it up.
Yeah.
Or you'll go just a little bit more sugar to sharpen, knock the edge off. If you want something, sharp, that's where you go to those black walnut with the tannins or maybe the chocolate with the spices.
I tell you what, though, I've had some cocktails that have complemented a good cigar really well, but you can kind of go either way. I have some cigars that I'm like, yeah, it's a good cigar. It's on our rating scale. It's a 5-er, but I pair it with a well-balanced cocktail, and it's like a whole new experience. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring Jack on the show, was to open up our listeners' minds to some more possibilities of different cocktails you might want to experiment with at home that can really complement any cigar really in your humidor. Beer is a tough pairing. I'm not big into wine, but we're going to bring on an expert in that area as well.
And the wines are, I mean, it's any pairing. But so, for example, my wife's not a fan of red wines. However, if I pull a medium rare steak off of the grill, drop it on her plate, and pour a glass of red wine, she'll say, "I don't like red wine." She'll take a bite of the raw meat,
drink, yeah,
and this is the most amazing wine in the world.
Right. Yep.
And we'll eat the steak and drink wine, and eat the steak and drink wine. And as soon as she's done eating the steak, she'll be like, "I don't like this wine."
Yeah, yeah,
right. But together,
yes,
I mean, a good robust red wine and a good slab of red meat. It is hard to beat that combination.
Well, we have a lot of experimenting to do. I have to drink a lot of different cocktails and smoke a lot of different cigars, and it's a hard job, but someone's got to do it.
It is.
Will, I hope you got a lot out of this segment, and
this was I learned a lot. I really did.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners, whether you drink often or not so often, I think every once in a while, if you want to have a nice cocktail, it's worth your time. Spend a little more time, make a cocktail. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised as you sit down and have your cigar. It's going to be a great experience, and I was hoping to open up our listeners to some of that. So
let me say something about folks who don't drink, too. One of the things that bitters and other flavoring agents will do for you is allow you to create drinks that make you feel like you're drinking.
Yes.
Or make you, look like you're drinking. So I would not recommend this with tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
But, one of my favorites when I'm going to be the one driving is, an old classic in the food service industry is when you come in hungover, ill, and you have to work your shift. You do a big vat of ginger ale with a lot of Angostura bitters. Mm-hmm. And that bitters still does have the digestives that it was originally created for. They're still digestive bitters, but ginger ale and Angostura is great. If you take a little hot sauce, my preferred one is sriracha, but whatever. If you add a little bit of hot sauce to that, I mean, it sounds appalling at first, but if you think about it, you've got sweetness, you've got the sharpness of the bitters, and you're adding spice. There's no alcohol, but you now have something that first of all, you're not going to throw it back. You're not going to drink 2,000 calories of ginger ale overnight. You may be able to do it with soda or club soda or tonic water if you don't want the sweetness, but it gives you a mouthfeel. It feels like you're doing something. And, there are a lot of other variations on that. If you want something refreshing and non-alcoholic, a tonic water with a couple of big wedges of orange crushed into it, so there's a little bit of orange juice but very few calories, a couple of good blasts of a decent orange bitters. You have a tall glass of something cold that's non-alcoholic, but it's fizzy,
so
low
calorie. Non-alcoholic versions of this,
and so you can really put some sharp flavors into things. And it's. Yeah,
I'm curious to hear the feedback from our listeners as to how that works out in pairs with cigars too.
Yeah.
So go experiment. Send us feedback. The show at StoicGeeks.com. What do you want to do? You want to take a short break now and come back with our smokes of the week?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's do that. We're going to take a short break. Hopefully, I'm going to finish this cocktail, and Jack's going to make me another one, and then things are really going to get interesting. Yes, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.